Case 1 Apollo 1. Apollo 1. January 27, 1967. Cape Kennedy, Florida. It was a routine plugs-out test, a countdown rehearsal designed to ensure the new Apollo command module would operate on its own internal power. Inside the capsule, strapped into their couches, were 3 astronauts. Command pilot Virgil Gus Grissom, a veteran of the Mercury and Gemini programs and the first American to fly in space twice. Senior pilot Edward H. White, the first American to walk in space. And pilot Roger B. Chaffee, a Navy pilot on his first mission. They were running through their checklist, lying on their backs, fully suited. The capsule was sealed with an atmosphere of 100% pure oxygen, pressurized to 16.7 pounds per square inch. A full 2 pounds above atmospheric pressure. This was standard procedure, but a dangerous one. At 6:31 p.m., a voltage spike was recorded in the spacecraft's wiring. A spark ignited in the environment of pure oxygen, and within seconds, flash fire consumed the cabin. The last communication from the crew was heard just 17 seconds after the first report of fire. The astronauts, trapped in their suits and the inward opening hatch, had no escape. It took ground crews 5 minutes to open the hatch. The 3 men had died from asphyxiation and burns within seconds, though the official report noted their burns were likely survivable. The investigation revealed a cascade of negligent design. The Apollo spacecraft was not only filled with flammable materials in a pure oxygen atmosphere, but it also featured a hatch that was virtually impossible to open in an emergency. The disaster halted the Apollo program for 18 months. The command module was redesigned from the inside out, removing flammable materials, replacing the pure oxygen atmosphere with a nitrogen-oxygen mix for launch, and installing a new outward-opening quick-release hatch. The mission was officially designated Apollo 1 at the request of the astronauts' widows. It was a brutal, necessary lesson in safety. Case 2, Soyuz 1. Soyuz 1. April 24, 1967. Orenburg Oblast, Soviet Union. Just 3 months after the Apollo 1 fire, the Soviet Union suffered its first in-flight space fatality. Colonel Vladimir Komarov was the sole pilot of Soyuz 1, the first mission of the new Soviet spacecraft intended to be a critical component of a lunar landing program. The spacecraft was rushed into service to beat the Americans to the moon. Before launch, Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, and other engineers inspected the craft and compiled a list of 203 structural problems. Despite these warnings and pleas to postpone, the political leadership, eager to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, ordered the mission to proceed. Komarov, who knew his friend Gagarin would be assigned the backup mission if he refused, chose to fly. The launch went as planned, but almost immediately, problems developed. One of the solar panels failed to deploy, severely limiting power, and the attitude control system malfunctioned. The mission was aborted after a single day. The re-entry procedure began normally, but a critical failure occurred. The main braking parachute did not deploy. The backup parachute also failed. The cause was later determined to be an improperly manufactured parachute container, possibly contaminated with glue from a polymerization process that prevented the chutes from ejecting. The descent module, with Komarov strapped inside, plummeted to Earth at a speed of approximately 200 kilometers per hour. It impacted the ground near the village of Karabalak in the Orenburg region. Rescue teams discovered the capsule on its side, crushed and burning. The re-entry capsule completely collapsed, leaving just a pile of dirt and debris. Komarov's remains were found in the central seat, killed instantly by the impact. He was the first human being to die during a spaceflight mission. The loss of Soyuz 1 was a catastrophic blow to the Soviet lunar program, forcing a complete redesign of the parachute system and the spacecraft's interior. Case 3, Soyuz 11. June 30th, 1971. In space, returning to Earth, the three cosmonauts, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev, had just completed a historic 22-day mission aboard the world's first space station, Salyut-1. The Soyuz 11 crew had set a new space endurance record. Their return to Earth appeared flawless. The re-entry capsule touched down in the steppes of Kazakhstan, perfectly on target, at 2:17 a.m. Moscow time. Recovery teams rushed to the capsule, expecting a warm welcome for the national heroes. When they opened the hatch, they found the 3 men motionless in their seats. There were no visible signs of trauma. The crew had died from asphyxiation, A valve in the descent module's pressure equalization system had unexpectedly opened at an altitude of about 168 kilometers. When the spacecraft's explosive bolts separated the orbital module from the reentry capsule, the air in the capsule vented into the vacuum of space. The valve opened at a height of over 150 kilometers, and the cabin depressurized in just over 30 seconds. The cosmonauts were not wearing pressurized spacesuits, a design decision made to accommodate 3 men in the cramped capsule, which would have been impossible with full suits. They had been instructed to remove their suits after deorbiting, leaving them completely exposed to the vacuum. Within 30 seconds, they were dead from the lack of oxygen. They had been dead for nearly 30 minutes before the capsule touched down. The tragedy forced the Soviet space program to a halt. The entire Soyuz design was revised. All future crews were limited to 2 cosmonauts so that they could wear full pressurized Sokol spacesuits during launch, docking, and re-entry. The Soyuz 11 crew remains the only human beings to have died in the vacuum of space. Case 4, STS-51L, Space Shuttle Challenger. January 28, 1986, Cape Canaveral, Florida. The launch of STS-51L was a high-profile event. Among the 7 crew members was Krista McAuliffe, a high school teacher who was slated to become the first civilian in space, a symbol of NASA's commitment to education. The launch, which had been delayed multiple times, took place on a particularly cold Florida morning, with temperatures at the launch pad dropping below freezing. Engineers from Morton Thiokol, the contractor responsible for the solid rocket boosters, had warned NASA that the rubber O-rings used to seal the joints on the boosters were not certified to function below 53 degrees Fahrenheit. They pleaded with NASA management to delay the launch. A teleconference the night before featured engineers arguing passionately against the launch, citing a lack of data on the O-rings' performance in cold temperatures. NASA managers overruled them, citing pressure from the launch schedule. Challenger lifted off. 73 seconds later, at an altitude of approximately 46,000 feet, the right solid rocket booster's aft field joint failed. A plume of fire emerged from the joint, burning through the external fuel tank. At T+73 seconds, the shuttle disintegrated in a violent explosion, a horrific sight visible to the millions watching live on television. The crew compartment, however, survived the initial breakup. It is believed that some of the astronauts remained conscious, possibly activating emergency air packs, before the compartment hit the Atlantic Ocean at a terminal velocity of over 200 miles per hour. The impact was unsurvivable. The Rogers Commission investigation revealed a systemic failure of NASA's organizational culture, a normalization of deviance where known flaws were accepted because they hadn't yet caused a catastrophe. The Space Shuttle program was grounded for over 2 years. The SRB joints were redesigned with an additional O-ring and a joint heater, and all future shuttles were equipped with a crew escape system. Case 5. Space Shuttle Columbia, February 1, 2003, over Texas and Louisiana. On the morning of February 1st, the Space Shuttle Columbia was returning to Earth after a 16-day scientific research mission, STS-107. The shuttle entered the Earth's atmosphere at approximately 8:44 a.m. EST, traveling at a speed of over 17,000 miles per hour. The heat of re-entry typically generates exterior temperatures exceeding 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, with the shuttle's thermal protection system, the heat-resistant tiles, designed to protect the orbiter and its crew. What the crew and mission control did not know was that during launch, 81.7 seconds into the flight, a piece of insulating foam had broken off from the external fuel tank and struck the leading edge of Columbia's left wing at a speed of over 500 miles per hour. The impact had created a hole in the reinforced carbon-carbon panels that are critical to maintaining the integrity of the wing. During re-entry, superheated atmospheric gases entered the wing through the breach. As Columbia re-entered the atmosphere, the hot gas melted the aluminum structure from the inside. At 8:53 a.m., the shuttle began to show signs of distress, with its left landing gear tire pressure sensors going offline. At 8:59 a.m., the shuttle broke apart over the skies of Texas and Louisiana. The 7 astronauts aboard, Commander Rick Husband, pilot William McCool, mission specialists Michael Anderson, Kalpana Chawla, David Brown, Laurel Clark, and payload specialist Ilan Ramon, were killed instantly or rendered unconscious within seconds of the structural failure. The shuttle's debris field stretched over hundreds of miles. The Columbia Accident Investigation Board, later concluded that the culture at NASA had become complacent. Home strikes had occurred on nearly every shuttle flight, and they had become normalized, dismissed as maintenance issues rather than life-threatening failures. The accident led to the end of the Space Shuttle program and a complete overhaul of NASA's safety protocols, including mandatory on-orbit inspections of the heat shield and a requirement that all future shuttle missions have a rescue plan in place. Case 6. Nedelin Catastrophe. The Nedelin Catastrophe, October 24, 1960, Baikonur Cosmodrome, Soviet Union. The Cold War was at its peak, and the Soviet Union was in a frantic race to develop the first intercontinental ballistic missile. The R-16, designed by Mikhail Yangel, was at the center of this effort. Marshal Mitrofan Nedelin, the commander of the Soviet Strategic Rocket Forces, was personally overseeing the launch preparation. The rocket was fully fueled with hypergolic propellants, highly toxic and corrosive chemicals that ignite on contact. On October 24th, a technical error occurred. A programmable current distributor was left switched to the post-launch position. An engineer noticed the mistake and switched it back. However, the onboard batteries were already powered up. Moving the switch caused an electrical signal to fire the engines of the second stage. The second stage engines ignited with a massive roar, the flames cutting directly into the fuel tanks of the first stage below.
A massive explosion and fireball engulfed the launch pad. The explosion and ensuing fireball incinerated those closest to the rocket. More than 100 military personnel, technicians, and engineers were killed instantly. Nedelin, who had grown impatient and left the viewing bunker to sit in a chair next to the rocket, was among the dead. Yangel, the chief designer, survived only because he had stepped away for a cigarette. Film cameras captured the horrifying scene. Andrei Sakharov, the Soviet physicist, later recounted seeing the footage. Those near the rocket were instantly incinerated, while those further away burned to death or were killed by toxic gases trapped by a security fence. The Soviet government under Nikita Khrushchev immediately imposed a complete news blackout. The public was told that Marshal Nedelin had died in a plane crash. The R-16 program was delayed by months, but the disaster was never officially acknowledged by the Soviet government until the 1990s. The catastrophic event was a grim testament to the dangers of rushing complex technology under immense political pressure. The launch site was cleaned up and the program continued. It was the deadliest space-related accident in history, with an official death toll of 126, though some estimates place the number much higher. Case 7 X-15 Flight 36597 X-15 Flight 36597. November 15, 1967. Delamere Lake, Nevada. Major Michael J. Adams, a U.S. Air Force pilot, was at the controls of the X-15, a hypersonic rocket-powered aircraft designed to push the boundaries of flight and near-space exploration. It was his 7th flight in the X-15. The craft was launched from a B-52 mothership at an altitude of about 45,000 feet. The X-15's rocket engine fired, propelling the aircraft to a speed of Mach 5.2 and a peak altitude of 266,000 feet, over 50 miles above the Earth, qualifying Adams as an astronaut. During the climb, an electrical disturbance began to affect the vehicle's flight controls, degrading its stability. Adams reported to ground control that the aircraft seemed squirrely. As the X-15 began its descent, it entered a spin. Adams, through a combination of skill and the aircraft's natural aerodynamic stability, managed to recover from the spin. However, he found himself in an inverted Mach 4.7 dive. As the aircraft plummeted into the thickening atmosphere at a descent rate of over 10,000 feet per second, the adaptive flight control system began to cause violent oscillations. The X-15 was subjected to forces it was not designed to withstand. The extreme aerodynamic loads, calculated to be around 15 gs, caused the aircraft to break apart over the Mojave Desert. The forward fuselage section, containing Major Adams, impacted the desert floor. He was killed on impact. It was the only fatal accident in the X-15 program's nearly decade-long history. The investigation concluded that the mishap resulted from a complex interplay of electrical issues and pilot disorientation in the high-altitude environment. While the program continued, the loss of Adams and his aircraft highlighted the inherent dangers of pushing past the edge of the atmosphere, where the line between aircraft and spacecraft becomes fatally blurred. Case 8 Soyuz 18 A Soyuz 18, April 5, 1975. Baikonur Cosmodrome to the Altai Mountains. Cosmonauts Vasily Lazarev and Oleg Makarov were scheduled to dock with the Salyut 4 space station. The launch of Soyuz 18 seemed nominal until the second and third stages of the rocket began to separate at an altitude of 145 kilometers. A crucial failure occurred. Only 3 of the 6 locks securing the stages disengaged, preventing a clean separation. The third stage's engine ignited, forcing the still attached second stage into an unexpected violent pitch, pulling the rocket off its trajectory. At T plus 295 seconds, the Soyuz's automated abort system detected the deviation. The escape tower had already been jettisoned, so the emergency separation was executed using the spacecraft's main engines. The crew was subjected to a crushing force of 21.3 gs, a brutal acceleration far beyond the 15 gs expected in an emergency. The descent module separated from the service and orbital modules and began a high-speed ballistic reentry. The capsule made a hard landing in the Altai Mountains, 829 kilometers north of the Chinese border. The crew, fearing they had landed in China, a nation with whom the Soviet Union had severely strained relations, immediately began destroying sensitive military documents. The capsule had rolled down a snowy slope and was perched dangerously close to a steep drop. They landed in deep snow, with a chest-high accumulation in the -7°C temperatures, and had to wait overnight in their cold-weather survival gear before rescue teams could reach them on skis. Lazarev was injured by the extreme G-forces and never flew again. Makarov would return to space on later Soyuz missions. The incident was partially revealed to the public only because the Soviets had to brief their American counterparts for the upcoming Apollo-Soyuz test project, referring to it simply as the April 5th anomaly. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.